So inner child healing would be what happened with me, or what was the scenario, or what was the relationship of my parents, how was the environment for me when I was growing up, which led me to act like this today. Because so many times the roots are actually in childhood. If, let us say, there's a guy, let us say, we are talking about, and he always had parents, both of the parents were aggressive, but he felt that he's not aggressive, and his only way to escape the situation would be fly as in, like, take the flight response. So he would escape. He will try, I will have so many hobbies that I just never have to come home. I will excel at school so that I don't have to come back home to my parents fighting or whatever that is. So he's always chosen flight even when he was a kid, right? Or maybe he's seen his father take the flight response or his mother take the flight response, and as a result he did that.
So, Shant, tell me just a bit about you first. Just please share whatever you can, whatever comes to you, nothing
Mm-mm-mm.
official, formal, whatever flows. And then we'll go from there. It's a raw and unfiltered podcast. We will dive deep into whatever subjects that you work with, and we'll go deeper into it as the thing flows. And Pratibha shared some questions with me. Usually she shares many questions, but it ends up being like three questions, 2 hour conversation. So,
Yeah.
we'll just go like that. So please just share a bit about you first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll start with my work, my profession. Apparently, that's how I would like to define myself. Huh? So I am a psychologist. I'm also a trained yoga teacher. I've done a ICF certified spiritual life coach and all of these certifications. I was always someone, and I would say, to this day, I have been someone who has been deeply interested in how mind works and how to actually transcend mind at the same time. So not to be stuck in the mind per se, but yeah, so that's what my life somehow has. When I connect the dots back now, always I was just curious about it. It just so magically happened that I found a subject like psychology, and then I ended up finding some practices which resonated with me, and as a result I was feeling that, oh, let's walk this path, and that's how I ended up here. So that's pretty much what I do. I started with my own journey, and I'm still on my own journey for sure, but along the
Always
way I got,
endless.
huh.
Always and endless.
I know, right? Yeah. So,
It's
so
spiral.
that's what. So, yeah, it
10 years
spirals.
later, you'll be like, wait, this is where I started.
I actually started just to be in my own space, and it was so pleasant. I think this is also my new learning recently. Also, I was so much into meditation and all of these practices and everything. As a result, I thought, okay, I don't have to. I can live without having to socialize. Actually, I spent a fair amount of time alone. Even in COVID, I was living alone in the entire building because I was the one who decided not to go home and everything like that.
Where do
So
you live in
now.
India?
Currently, I'm living in Haryana, but I have lived. I don't stay at one place, but my parents are basically from Haryana. So currently, I've just moved in with them. But at that time I was living in Chandigarh. So yeah, so I just I just went ahead with this alone journey, and I think thankfully my subject was like that. It made me to kind of offer the same thing to others as well. Psychology, anywhere I've worked, any jobs I've done, everything has been around the same theme. So yeah, so I think it's now mix, and it's right now me balancing my life with my personal practices and also offering to other people. So that's what it is
Hmm.
about right now.
Nice. Balance is important. And you studied psychology in university.
Yeah, I studied from Punjab University, Masters in Psychology. I did from there.
Nice. And then you had like a spiritual experience around that time, or what happened? What got you into?
Okay, I would say I was never. I was okay. I was born in a family where people wanted me to be very academic and everything. So I
Hmm.
did pursue masters in psychology really from that perspective. Honestly, I was interested in it, but I knew colleges are very outdated in terms of psychology, because psychology up to now has been treated as a very Western subject, but we
Right.
have not touched upon Indian context of psychology at all. The depth
Right.
that we bring through yoga and so much more. Yoga is just because people know it mainstream, but there is so much that we can't even put in words, right? So
Of
yeah,
course.
so I think my journey actually started not with psychology. My journey started when I started. There was this ashram which opened right in front of my college, and it was like, I was really curious about it. Like, I see these monks, they look so pretty, they look so, they look so, like, they know something. So I was like, oh, this is so nice. I can just look at them all day, just walking such a slow pace and everything. So one day I decided to go in, and I was like, you guys, like, not you guys, I said to them, but I was
You
like,
guys, come on, share some wisdom here.
So I just got done with my college and I went into the ashram and I asked someone, I was like, do they teach yoga here? Which was very intuitive. Not someone like my parents thought that I was a very flexible kid, so she should go to yoga. Never had any spiritual roots with yoga at all in my life. And I see these monks and this is the
Most
question
people
that comes
still
to my
think
mind.
yoga is just stretching.
I know, right? That's what I was also taught. So that was where, so the illusion definitely, the moment I met these monks and all these practitioners, I was like, oh my god, this is so deep. So I started practicing from there. Yeah. Should I stop if I can't hear you?
You cannot hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes, yes, yes. You were stuck
Yeah.
in between. Yeah, great.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's it. Then I started learning yoga from them, and they were very like,
It
I did
was
not have any money.
traditional yoga or which lineage was it? Do you remember?
I remember, yes, yes, yes. So they were teaching Hatha Yoga for sure, but they were teaching. So there is this Vivekananda ashram, and then there Ramakrishna Mission ashram.
So
So
it
in
was
Chandigarh,
Ramakrishna Mission.
yes, yes, yes. So both of these ashrams had collaborated together. So the Vivekanand Kendra had their meditation hall and library, and the Ramakrishna Mission ashram also had the meditation hall and everything. So both the traditions were merging in between that. So there were chantings also, everything also, and then there was traditional Hatha Yoga. So both of these were being taught there. So that's how I started learning. I really went deep into it. I really started loving it, and
Good lineage
I
to
was just
start with.
I know, right? It was like it was just random, but that's how it, kind of it just led me to a path. And from there, then I ended up doing. Uh huh.
No such thing as random.
Oh yeah, I agree. When you look back, the dots connect. But when you are like, when you are living life, then you think, what is this? What is happening? So yeah. But really, now that I see it, never. I don't feel that there is any such thing. Randomness is there. So yeah. Ah, so that's very much it. It like led me to that journey, and then I was very young. Then I decided to go to Vipassana out of curiosity because Yuval
Goenka,
Noah
right?
Harari. Yeah, yeah, SN Goenka. So Yuval Noah Harari had recently released a book, and he was doing all podcast and everything. I was like, wow, this guy is so cool, and he does Vipassana. I should also go. I was such a kid. I mean, I don't know how I ended up there, and I did it, and I felt so amazing. Obviously, so and that also led me to that practice, and then somehow I just ended up being in multiple spheres, multiple practices, multiple teachers came into my life from all places. So I think I'm still on that journey. It started with yoga somewhere, and then it's just led me ahead and ahead with exploring multiple fields like that.
Nice. It's a spiral.
It is a spiral. And I do keep coming back. For example, I definitely lose touch with certain practices at certain times. And the moment I'm like, okay, oh, right now I need that practice. So I really have to catch back with the same thing. So it just keeps, kind of all the lessons that you think you've learned, you come back to them again just to, have that deeper access to the same thing. So definitely a spiral.
So you, in terms of work, you call yourself a psychotherapist. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a combination of, because I've worked with a psychotherapist, like a combination of, and I think it's a good combination. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is my understanding. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the psychology aspect from the modern Western system, and then the spiritual aspect from different systems, and then combining the two to giving a more holistic approach to healing or understanding or therapy for the patients and clients, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say recently I've also the new thing that I'm really loving lately is all of it, not just the mind and the soul, if we can call that for right now, the spirituality sake. We do love to merge, psychology and spirituality, and there always has been an intersection. It's just that the therapists that are popular have just never acknowledged it. For example, Freudian psychology. Carl Jung has been major proponent of it, and he has always promoted Indian school of psychology in
He
certain
was
ways.
pretty big into the unconscious and shadow
Yes.
thing, no? So that's
Yeah.
basically what spirituality is.
Yeah. And he was actually he came to India. He did his research in yoga and all of these things. So he was well educated. But the way Western theories have developed, they always wanted to give title to one person. So since then, they never gave credit to Indian school of system so many times, even when the knowledge and the theories were taken exactly from the same school systems. So that has been a bit of a mismatch for at certain points. But still, it's nonetheless the same thing, right?
Are you trying to bridge that gap with your own kind of passion
Uh,
project, you can say, or
I
your
would say
curiosity?
I can't say I'm doing that because that's too big of a thing. I think major movement has to like start in that scenario, because even things like yoga nidra, now we have NSDR, non sleep NSDR, I forgot the full form now. So yeah, non sleep deep rest, right? So things like that. So now what happens is, when you do not give credit to the text or from where you refer to it as, you end up losing the depth of it sometimes. So if a scientist does not understand Yoga Nidra to the entirety, if I don't understand it and I say it is my practice, it's gonna not lead people to the depth that it can lead to if they understand, oh my god, Yoga Nidra is so much more, and maybe this person had this experience, but I can have a very different experience. At the same time, it's not fair. The person from where these texts originally came is from where they should be referred to. So I would say I would love to bridge that gap, or I would love to be someone who kind of supports that mission, but I'm too small to be able to make a huge change. So yeah.
But for your own understanding, like how are you um, kind of pursuing these two fields which historically were looked separated, but they are very intermingling, obviously, because mind,
Hmm.
body, soul, it's all connected. So
Hmm.
how are you for your own journey? How are they coming together for you, for yourself, and in your sharings with others?
So I think number one the major feedback that I noticed in the therapy system, and I think all of us therapists who are in from this generation, specifically after COVID hit, what we noticed is talk therapy was not giving enough results. You can
Hmm.
talk about your issues all the time. You can be like, okay, I share with you, you share with me, we chat, but and I can give you insights, and I can be a wise person, I can hold space for you, and that does wonders to a certain extent. But the moment it comes to releasing energies, the moment it comes to kind of releasing old traumas or old patterns, or to feel understood by someone, or just to be able to be more present with your own self, requires you to also include your body, body based practices like asana part or pranayama part of yoga that we talked about, right? So I think right now what I notice is, people, the problem with us is not that our minds are not sharp, or I would say, majority of us are, we are so much into overthinking, our minds are so active, we actually are disconnected from our own bodies. And
Yes.
so many times the way is to come back to your body instead of away from it. And what happened is, so many spiritual traditions, not directly, but somehow so many spiritual teachers also started promoting getting out of the body to be a higher thing, which is true in certain cases. But what happened is, since we are so not connected to our being, it's very hard. So it's like, as deep as the roots are, as how the tall the tree is going to be, something like that, right? So I think I really resonate with that. So when someone comes to me who is really anxious, my work won't be like, you go and meditate. They will meditate in a specific way that works for them, but it would be first, okay, come back to your body, come back to your five senses. Do you feel settled in yourself? Can you kind of deepen your breath? Now all of these body based practices then lead them to so many times in meditative states, and in states which can go beyond the mind. But we can't go beyond the mind by agreeing to mind all the time, right? So that has to be, so we have to be able to see mind as a like as a movie which is like outside of us. So
Yeah.
that approach is, I think, coming very much from the Indian school system as well, from Buddhism,
Because
from
that's what meditations do. They take you into consciousness space, observing space, so you automatically just you become detached. So it's like, okay, it's just a movie, right? So how are
yeah.
you implementing all of this? So let's say if I was a client, I come to you and I say to you, I have anxiety. Like
Mm.
majority of people in today's generation, or not generation,
Mm-hmm.
everybody, because of the modern world, everybody's in phones, information, so much, the body is so activated, mind is so busy, of course everybody's going to be anxious. So now let's say I come to you, I'm your first time client, or your,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you call them. So I come to you and I say, look, I have Shan, I have anxiety, and my mind is too crazy, and I have too much negativity in my head. I'm just saying a very general one, which a lot of people are struggling
Uh-huh.
with. Anna, you know this better than I do. So what's your approach? Like, how do you approach this?
Okay, so first of all, let us say if someone comes to me in a very panicky state, so there will be two scenarios. One is that something recent has happened, which can be extreme, and another can be that nothing specifically has happened, but they are in the state for long enough that it has become normal for them. So first we'll analyze that if someone comes right away from after a very traumatic incident, let us say, so in that scenario we would just literally make them breathe and listen to what has happened and everything like that. But let us say if you come I will also listen to you if you come to me after a prolonged state. That is definitely going to happen. But then we will analyze, okay, what response are you in? So what I mean by that is we all have our own stress responses, right? Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight when you get angry. So someone comes to me that I'm feeling really angry, or someone comes to me that I am most of the time I've seen myself having outbursts and everything like that. So first we identify that what is your unique stress response, and once
Mhm.
we feel that, then we based upon that give you those very practices. So for example, if you're coming with anger issues, it will really help you to have very maybe a very sweaty workout or something that is aggressively physically aggressive, to release that energy. But if you let us say if you're someone who is struggling with freeze response, a good example would be with phones. We have seen that people who keep scrolling, they know they have to do something, but they just can't have the energy to go and do it, and as a result they stay in this loop. So it is like they know what they have to do, but they just don't have the energy to gather that. A lot of people right now, we notice that they are in freeze response. And what happens in freeze response is that it is like a prolonged stressful state when your brain is overstimulated and you're not giving it enough nourishment through food, water, or even the kind of emotions you feel or the kind of content you consume.
Do
As
you
a
think
result, you
that
can,
these response is like a societal thing going on because of the way our societies are functioning?
I would say what I observe mostly, fight and flight are very majorly known responses and we understand it. Freeze and fawn. Freeze is when you literally are stuck in a loop and you don't know how to come out of it. You are like, it's like constant state of brain fog, so lack of clarity. And
Right.
fawn is people pleasing. And if we see around, if even with me, the most of the clients who come to me are usually around these issues these days, because thanks to a technology and thanks for overconsumption, as a result, since your dopamine, it's you're just all the time so over flooded with so much information, you just your brain is just tired, and it's like it's a
Right.
burnout. But it's not a burnout that is like from like from working on something a project that you picked. It's a burnout you don't even realize. It's like an energy leak you don't even see because it's just such a consistent thing, right?
I think this is very interesting subject and it's very important because can you like clearly make somebody understand on a mind, body, spirit level how these four fundamental things are working? Because and also include
Yeah,
nervous system in this because it's all connected to nervous system. So
yeah,
fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and I mean everybody has been in those moments. It's very human to go through these.
yeah.
Uh, Fortunately, we have the tools to be able to come out of them, recognize them, and do something about it. Most people don't. So, can you please just elaborate a bit on these four specific ones?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll take an example from a stressful situation. Let's start with fight, right? Let us say there is a lion chasing a deer, right? Deer is not the right example here. So let us say fight would be because deer is a flight example. I just realized. So yeah, so let us say a fight is when you literally you react back, right? So if two lions are fighting, then this would be classic. Both of them are in a fight response. So let us say if the one lion is like, okay, I'm gonna chase you, and the other one chases them back. That's like fight response. If you step on dog's tail and the dog barks, or if they're about to bite you, they you activated their fight response. So it's like a quick reaction, and it's a reaction which is a resultant of it, right? So that is fight. Then flight would be the deer example that I started with. It would be like, okay, lion is chasing and you just try to escape the situation anyhow you can. Like you put all your energy to run away from that situation, right? That would be flight. Then freeze would be that you are like the deer is just frozen in such a way, and this happens I think with zebras is what I read. So zebra knows that now I'm already being caught by lion, right? I'm already being caught, so I've given up. Now I'm gonna numb myself to an extent that I don't feel the pain. So it's like you are not in the body, it's dissociation, right? So let us say if I can't escape the situation, if I'm gonna be dying, what do? I'll just make myself believe I'm not here, and it's not a conscious thing that happens, it just naturally happens. So dissociating so that you feel less pain. This is a mechanism which has actually been seen a lot in athletes who do high intensity, practices. Everyone is like, how can you not feel the pain right now? And it's so many times the shadow aspect of that very sport or that very thing that they're doing, or their own shadow is that they learn how to dissociate from your body to an extent that they don't feel the pain in that very moment. They do see have consequences of it. So this is sometimes people consciously get into it to achieve certain results as well. So dissociation is like classic trait of
I
freeze
did a
response.
lot of this with pain, by the way.
Mm,
But it's not good for you long term.
yeah.
It's really, it mentally not, but also for body, it's not good. Creates a lot of
Yeah.
chronic injuries and all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when we don't know, when we don't have any other option, we all resort to freeze. Actually, freeze is the last option that we have left, because we are like, I can't escape the situation. I can't do nothing. So instead of feeling that emotion, because we were not taught how to feel those feelings in the first place, so we learned, let's dissociate. So I can imagine, and I think a lot of people, I think most of people who are coming to me, as clients these days, are usually dealing with freeze response,
Because
resultant
I
of
feel
which.
like that's also how, like in modern society, like think about it this way: most people are living in cubicles, right, in their houses, in
Yeah.
cubicles, and it's not like they are meditating or doing, conscious work all the time or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So they're either on phones, they're scrolling, they're consuming something. So now, in the modern setup of today's time, how does these responses? So, for example, if somebody is in a fight mode, either they'll fight with their partner, which a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
end up doing, right? There's like two lions, partners fighting, and then the flight response is they want to escape somewhere, something, something,
Yeah.
something. But let's take a COVID situation example. You're stuck in an apartment with your partner, and then all these four are activated. How do they translate into this scenario? Because this is a good way to
Mm,
understand how it works, because this is
yeah,
what
yeah.
we are struggling with in modern time the most.
I love that actually. So, in terms of, like, for example, let us say if the partners are in a immediate fight response. Fight is a very fiery response as well, right? It's a lot of, even if you tune into your. First of all, I would love. If people were in a space where they want to be more conscious, I love to make them reflect. With my clients, I would be like, okay, I would ask them, how does it feel in your body right now? That very moment they drop down from your head, because what it does is you feel a energetic, let us say all of a sudden you feel a reaction in your body, and as a result you build thoughts, right? So those thoughts, the moment that we are able to kind of come just to sensations, half of the
Mm.
problem is usually solved, because now you don't have a story cooking up in your head. That is one thing.
Yes.
But let us say situation is so intense that you can't just shift it, because that also happens. So in that scenario we give them practices. So a very fiery response, that is a fight response, a very good alternate would be to kind of ensuring that you take space from, if you are in the situation right now, because the situation is going to.
But it's COVID time, they're stuck. What do they do?
Okay, I'm pretty sure they can turn their faces in the opposite direction, right? Because that's, you will need to, if you are literally, if the face of the person in front of you is gonna make you angry, you will have to do something to take space. Space doesn't mean you have to go to Himachal or something, or you know yeah, you don't have to go like far away, but just taking enough space so that you can attune back to yourself and get out of that story that you're creating about them, that this person is bad, they did this to me, all of that. And once you are
The
kind of.
victim. The victim.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that very time, and then you're like, okay, let me take a few deep breaths. There is EFT tapping that I think really works well with all kind of cases where anger, just there are anger outbursts. So EFT tapping is, there are there are multiple meridians in our body, according to Chinese medicine, and when you
Mm.
tap on them, your body like naturally gets into a relaxed state, and as a result, you are not aggressive or you are not reactive anymore. So that is one way. It's one of the quick tools. It takes 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes to do that tapping sequence. A particular, I create those specific for the clients usually. So they do that tapping and they feel relieved, right? That is more of a quick result.
But
Quick. Then
yeah, but helpful to have that. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Because usually with anger, it's a quick response. You have to stop somewhere. You can't be like, okay, I will just keep reacting and still not feel, will be okay. Because it will, the more you
Because then
fuel
it
anger.
goes exponential and then it goes out of control.
Exactly. So that is one step that you will have to take a step back, and that's how it starts, right? Breathing deeply and all of the all the somatic practices, body-based practices usually work well with people who have fight response. right? And then we have yeah then we have the flight response. With flight response, what happens is that you just want to escape the situation, which means you just want to be avoiding a negative scenario in your mind, in your body, because everything that you're trying to manifest outside is also happening within you. So what I would want these people, whoever has flight response usually has very hard time sitting with their emotions, because they are just so used to escaping their emotions. So I
Right.
would again, so what will happen is, let us say if someone is like, okay, I'm just gonna leave this relationship, and it will be very common scenario that this person not only leaves this relationship, they leave every relationship right when the things get intense, or when there is emotional demand coming up or something like that.
This
So in
is
that
this is
scenario.
this is sorry, I'm interrupting, but is this
Mhm.
where we say that escaping a relationship is not an answer because you end up repeating that pattern again with another form, just the name is
Hmm.
different, right? How do, in this scenario, let's say, instead of escaping, what can that person do to really break that pattern?
Hmm. First would be they will have to realize they have this pattern. That is very important, because so many times people are like, no, that's because of this person I'm leaving the relationship. I don't have any fault. I
Yeah.
see they are all the time this. So it's very common to think that you are the victim in this scenario. First, you have to realize that in your past relationships, or in your past even friendships, even in office, you would see that this guy escapes the moment things get intense, right? So for this guy or girl, whatever, not to gender it, but yeah, so this is what happens. So now in terms of flight response, we will have to learn how to attune to our emotions, right? It can start with, let us say, practices like, like yoga is actually a great practice, more grounding yoga. So root chakra based yoga could be great, right? So more
Mm.
yoga which involves lower body, so hamstring stretches and all of those, they really ground the person, because people who have flight response are usually more vata in nature, right? So they have more air element, and as a result they have this avoidance tendency as well. So we will ground them. I will potentially give them certain practices to do that. And then I will also, some affirmations might also work with them, depending on the client. It also varies, obviously. And then we will, kind of learn that, okay, the thing is that emotions, any kind of emotion that you feel, it actually has the capacity to stay only 90 seconds. You will, if you really attune to it, only for 90 seconds can you feel that emotion. But when you avoid it, and when you suppress it, and when you deny it, you elongate that thing, and it as a result gets stored in your body, right? So it becomes a pattern. So it's a very it's a thing that all of us think that when there is an intense emotion arising, that it's going to last forever, and I have to, no way, I have to just let go of it, release it, or just be, feel better emotion, or be happier, or something like that. So people who have flight response really have to learn how to be okay with being uncomfortable. And I think yoga teaches you very well. So when you are deep into the stretch and you are really
Also,
uncomfortable,
Vipassana and meditation practice.
yeah, practices of all sorts, for sure. Apparently all of these practices are taking us to the same route, right? They're
Yeah,
making us face
totally.
what is, instead of making stories and thinking this is what it is, seeing things as
Totally.
they are.
This is the key, like isness coming here, like it's the key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so these practices potentially will help them. But I think with flight response, so many times emotional avoidance is also there. So there can be some element of inner child healing too, which comes with everything. So inner child healing would be what happened with me, or what was the scenario, or what was the relationship of my parents, or what was how was the environment for me when I was growing up, which led me to act like this today, because so
Mm.
many times the roots are actually in childhood. So
Totally.
maybe this, yeah, so if let us say if let us say there's a guy, let us say we are talking about, and he always had parents, both of the parents were aggressive, but he felt that he's not aggressive, and his only way to escape the situation would be fly as in, like, kind of take the flight response. So he would escape. He will try, he would try keep I will have so many hobbies that I just never have to come home. I will excel at school so that I don't have to come back home to my parents fighting, or whatever that is. So he's always chosen flight even when he was a kid, right? Or maybe he's seen his father take the flight response, or his mother take the flight response, and as a result he did that. So it can be multiple things, but childhood definitely would have certain role to be playing in it, as a result that you develop such mechanisms. So
Mm.
that would be, So it will be diving deep into why is it happening in the first place, how can we change it, and for that the person has to be willing to change it as well, right?
Hmm.
So the tools only work when you think that there is something to change about me. If you think the other person is the problem, we are missing the first step. So yeah, so that's how it works with flight response.
What about the other
Then
two?
yeah, so yeah, then we have the fawn response. Yes, fight, flight,
Freeze
freeze.
and
Then we have
fawn.
freeze and fawn. Yes, yes, yes. So with freeze response, what happens is that freeze response is very complex, because I think one of the classic examples of freeze response is a kid who has prepared the speech to his death. Like he's tried so many. It's been many days. He's been preparing. He goes to the stage and he just freezes. Literally, he doesn't remember a thing. It can be one of the very basic examples of freeze response. In that scenario, connection to body is very important, and so many times your anxiety level, and if your body is all the time in a reactive state, not just because the stress is present, but just because your body has learned that to be the normal thing, which again goes back to childhood. If the parents are all the time fighting, the kids are not going to be peaceful, even if they appear to be peaceful from the outside, right? So if your body learned that you always have to be hyper vigilant. So I always think of cats when I think of this example. You would notice that cats are always attuned to their environment, right? Because they have lived and they have evolved in such a way, because they were always supposed to be vigilant of danger, right? That's not peaceful. That's an evolution that came to save themselves, right? Exactly with humans. If the kid was like, I have to walk on eggshells, I have to ensure that I don't do this, or my mother will get angry, I have to do this, or else my father will get angry.
Like survival.
Yeah, they were all the time thinking of survival. So where do you have the capacity to have a life which is calm when you were always worried about survival? So as a result, you might grow up and you might be like, okay, there's nothing bad in my life. I have a job. I'm married also. Maybe I have kids also. Everything is good on the outside, but why am I not able to feel happy? Usually in those scenarios, freeze response is involved, because you are not reacting to the stress which is happening right now. Your body has never learned to be at peace, because you're reacting to the stress which happened maybe long back, and your
Right.
body is like, your nervous system is like, this is the only way I know how to exist, because what if that happens again? What if you are in the same situation or something like that? So that is a learned response. With freeze response, there has to be a very different unfolding. We will have to explore your childhood, and we will have to introduce more and more of somatic practices. At the same time, we have to attune to emotions, because so many times we end up numbing ourselves in case of freeze response. So okay, so what am I actually feeling right now? What is happening in my body right now? How can I, when I'm sitting with someone, am I really sitting with them, or is something else going on in my mind? Do I feel the connection? When was the last time I cried? Like, all of these questions which make them reflect upon if they're connected to the emotions or not, are very centric in when it comes to freeze response. And as a result, potentially them slowly learning a lot of nervous system regulation tools and all of that. What we will not do in freeze responses, we will not go to a hyper uh, intense way of coming out of stress. What I mean by that is, for example, a free person who is in a freeze response, I would potentially not recommend them to do ice baths, which is a very trendy thing, right? Because ice baths so many times put them into stress. With a lot of people it happens. So first I will share with them tools to calm them down, and as a result, slowly maybe they will be in a place where ice baths will actually give them, not put
Hmm.
them in a further ahead freeze response. It has happened with a lot many times with people that they were already in a freeze response, they did ice bathing and everything, now they feel even more shut in their body or shut in their emotions. So it can have different impact on different people, but it can be one of the scenarios. So it's more complex when it comes to freeze response, I feel. Other
Interesting.
than that, yeah, it is very layered and it has to be very individual also. So
Right.
yeah, then we have the fawn response. Fawn response is basically the tiger is chasing the deer, and deer is like, I'm so sweet, please don't kill me. So deer is like, you should not kill me, I'm just a sweet baby, or whatever that is. So fawn is when you start people pleasing, when you please the boss because you think your job is in danger, when you please the boss to get the promotion, also that is also another example. It is very common, because I think in India we have it engraved within us, because we have been like, yeah, because anyone who comes to India, like, guest come to your home. Guest has to be the priority, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. But so many times it ends up being to an extent that we become such, we are all about sacrifice. that we just do not
Martyr,
have.
playing the martyr or the savior.
Yeah,
I
exactly. I
had
love
such a
that
deep,
word.
it took me so many years to realize I had a savior complex, and like breaking out of it is not easy, man. When your
Yeah.
whole like identity is shaped around, like not identity, your way of working is shaped around it, and you don't realize like you are just killing yourself in the process of it. It's
I
really,
know, right? Yes,
yeah,
and it runs deep, exactly what you said.
very deep, it's very deep.
And you would also notice that, because of that, I don't know. This is my theory right now, but I'm just sharing it because it's coming to my mind right now. A lot of people who visit India, like from outside, from some, from any country. So what they notice is we have yes, no, and then we have this, like the head wobble thing. I don't know what it is called.
Indian bubble.
Yeah, I whenever I have some whenever I try to notice, I always try to become conscious. Most of the time I try to become conscious of my body and how I'm feeling and everything. So what I notice is this wobble actually for me definitely is a kind of a fawning response. So when I do this, I'm trying to kind of be on the same page with the other person without actually having to express to them. And ran this theory with few of my friends also, so it happened same with them. So it's not factual, but I definitely have this theory that this can be a very physical manifestation of our nature, which is very very like people pleasing, simple as that, because we want to be like, okay, people are safe, we are good people, we are safe people, we are nice people, all of that.
Yeah. So I
Mm.
have a few follow-ups around this because this is very, it's very well explained. Thank you for that. I think it's very helpful for people to know this. So I have few follow-ups. One is it's all connected to traumas, right? All of this. You can call it ancestral
Mm-hmm.
trauma, collective trauma, individual trauma, childhood trauma. But now at the same time, trauma has become a very trendy word nowadays, like yoga. Everything has become trauma. So, how do you, as a therapist nowadays, I'm not saying that somebody coming up with saying they have a trauma, they don't have one, but how do you, as a therapist, differentiate between traumas that are really like traumatizing events that have happened with people that really get stuck and alters their, things and, all that, to let's say somebody had an event that was negative, but they're categorizing it as trauma, which is something you can overcome through some practices quickly, it's not like a
Mm-hmm.
deeply ingrained trauma from childhood which has shaped your personality, which has altered your nervous system, your brain functioning, all these things, so how do you first connect that piece in differentiation with these different responses?
Mm-hmm.
First that, then I'll ask you a follow-up question after that. Yeah.
I love that question. First of all, it's a very Gen Z thing. I feel if with anyone who inquires me as Gen Z, they already know all these terms and they're like, "This is what is wrong with me. Now you please fix me." Like that's the mentality they
Yeah.
come in. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this is and recent. I think it's a very misused, big misuse of terms like OCD. Then trauma is another word, obviously, which people are just throwing around. And I would say makes sense. Like for example, I would hear people.
It's like when you say something so commonly, then people with like real deep traumas, nobody pays attention to them, because
Yeah.
it's decent. It's funny, but yeah, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And I think we definitely want to be mindful while using these terms. 100% so. At the same time, I think in most of the cases when you don't know emotional regulation, even the normal or what I don't know what even normal is, if that's a very vague word to use, but even regular life scenarios can end up being traumatizing, right? So that's where the differentiation comes. So it's not about what event is going to be traumatizing for one person is not going to be traumatizing for the other person. It very much can be, it can be anything. But that being said, it depends upon the cultural acceptance. It depends upon what conditioning they have come up with, and it really really depends on what emotion do they have the capacity to regulate their own emotions. What I mean by that is that one kid can go up to the stage, and just because they were not able to speak at that time, can take it up as, okay, next time I will learn better. This time I learned that I have this happens. the other kid can go on the stage and feel really ashamed, and as a result isolate themselves and think they're a bad person and a bad kid, and I'm never gonna go on the stage. Both of the kids, kind of process the same scenario in a very different way. And it is actually one of the common things now. In schools you're gonna have such opportunities, and I think schools is where a lot of trauma happens for a lot of people because of the way schools are designed, and then you have similar age group people with less emotional regulation tools and everything like that. But that being said, I would say I really like to classify it as big T trauma and small t trauma sometimes. So small t traumas all of us have had, like, in the previous generation it was not a surprise if the father or the mother are gonna slap the kid, or just be, there were certain things which were culturally acceptable. Does not mean that it's not going to be traumatizing for someone, but since it was little more culturally acceptable at that particular amount of time, kids did not feel it as intensely as they would today. That is the
Big T
scenario.
trauma would be like sexual abuse,
Yeah.
like big abandonment stuff. Uh,
Yes.
these kind of things would be more like, okay, it's gonna really impact the person in long term with many
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, so if army professionals who come with PTSD, who have seen war happen in front of them, who've seen
Or
their friends die in front of them, now
yeah,
that's like big trauma, and that trauma has to be addressed as soon as we can, because it's in high emergency scenario compared
mm,
to a trauma which is like, which we are uncovering. So many times small t traumas, people are not even aware of it. Usually it is like, we in therapy we kind of start to unravel it, then okay, this
mm,
might be the reason why you feel abandoned now in relationship or something like that. That could be one example of, kind of small
yes,
t trauma. So yeah, so but if we were to define trauma, I really like this definition by Gabor Mate. He says trauma is not what happens to you, it is what happens inside your body as a reaction to what happened to you.
yeah.
So yeah, so let us say the same
Because a
example that I
monk
give.
in a war scenario can feel nothing, he will just be like, he'll process it. So it really depends on the person in that.
Yes.
And what you're saying, it makes sense. Like children or in younger times, things stay longer because they haven't developed that ability to process yet.
Yeah,
They are very
exactly.
raw. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Emotional regulation tools is the centric thing here. Trauma is not because the outside world is so evil. It can be, and the world can be harsh and everything. But trauma is also about what happened within you, and if you can regulate it, a very seemingly traumatic event can be very less traumatic for you.
So
So,
let's say these childhood traumas that happen with people, uh, early childhood or late childhood, but primarily early childhood. So the trauma kind of stays in the body, right, as a memory or an imprint or something, 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 and then
mhm,
they may have a spiritual awakening experience and something they will realize and they will start processing it. So how does that work? So if you can explain that for somebody who may be having it or dealing with it, because that's quite an intense process. Because you
mhm,
something was suppressed in a Pandora's box for a very long time, and now something happens and it comes out. And usually, what I've noticed from my experience as well, and from like generally what I've heard is relationships bring out this stuff. So what's the connection between the healing mechanisms of childhood traumas, which are like really, because at that time the child doesn't have the abilities to process it. Maybe some have, if they have, like some evolved Dalai Lama souls, but generally they don't.
yeah.
And then the second part is, why do relationships bring them up so much?
I think we can go both ways about it. Relationships are first definitely mirror, so that's how sometimes trauma come up. If you're living alone, it's very easy to think, "Oh my God, I'm such a saint. I do no harm to the world." But when you get into a relationship and then you realize, "Oh my God, I can be so bad. I can make mistakes, and the other person can make mistakes, and I can get triggered so easily, and all of those things."
No,
Now,
but
when
what about it? Like, why does that do that? Why does it? There's that element, but why does it trigger the deeper traumatic Pandora box things?
okay, because we are relational creatures, right? A human being, the moment they're born into a relational setup. You potentially have a mother or a father, or someone is gonna take care of you, otherwise the human baby is not gonna survive, right?
Yeah.
That is
It's
clear.
conditional love from the get go, not yeah.
Yeah. So the moment you're born, and now let us say now you walk your path of choosing to be in specific relationships, that very things that you faced or went through, and all of the ways you learned relationships to be are gonna be reflected here, because you are result of your mind is basically conditioned that this is how it is. So if you always felt, if your mother always cooked good food for you, and that's her way of expressing love, you would grow up and all of a sudden you're like, I don't know why I feel that only when my partner says that she can't cook food, I feel like she doesn't love me. This came up because you saw that as a way of loving. Now in this scenario, you would potentially communicate to your partner. First you'll become aware this is the thing, then you'll communicate with your partner, and you will understand that if she's not cooking food does not mean she doesn't love me. It is just an association that I've made in childhood long back. Now that was very simple example. There are things
And
which
it
are
is
way
like
more complex.
subconscious. You wouldn't even realize, but it's
Yeah, you won't even realize, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm angry, my girlfriend doesn't love me. Within you, you're like that. So it is definitely, most of the time, it is not conscious. You have to make it conscious. That's where the work is, right? So, yeah. And following up with the same, another question that you said, that how does it actually work out, So, since we are relational creatures and we just can't, humans are always in a relationship, like always you're gonna live, you're gonna be in some sort of relationship with someone at all times, right? Maybe friend, colleague, or just people you see on the street. Even that is also sort of a kind of a situation, kind of a relation. So yeah, now when you grow up, and let us say if you so love, okay, I would just love to share this one thing before I go into that tangent. I really love this theory where you must have heard about Maslow's hierarchy, where the baseline need is food, shelter, and everything. So these are basic needs. So we really need to touch upon the topic of needs, because humans' relations and needs are very central to our relations as well. So what happens is, we must have heard that with Maslow, that okay, if your food and this and that are met, then you would go ahead with higher needs. Maybe you would have more need for love, maybe you would have more need for belonging, then and as a result you will have a need for transcendence. There is one teacher which I kind of agree with. I can't say that this is not a factual thing which I can't approve, but she says that love is even higher of a need, because when someone goes through a breakup, you will see them not wanting to eat, not wanting to do anything. That kind of a dissociation or disconnection happens for them. You can hear me, right?
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. I'm
That
listening.
kind of disconnection happens. So I really felt it, because I think since our love is such a basic and such an important and very kind of required need for us, as a result, when we see that okay, my parents give me love when this happens, and my parents take away love when this happens. So whatever way it was conditioned, but whatever ways they had their own expectations from you, you learn this is what love is. When you grow up and you realize that first of all, the person who I'm going to be potentially in a relationship with is not going to be conditioned with same set of rules and everything like that. No two people are going to be same, and since they're not for multiple reasons, so then you start realizing okay, this has to be changed. So that's why the moment you enter into a relationship or a friendship, or even any kind of connection with someone, you will start noticing the differences of how both of you guys approach love in the first place, and as a result you will see that. Now that's what how conscious person's mind will look. But if someone is unconscious, then they would be like, this person said this about me. So like a classic example of the food that I gave, she didn't cook food for me, she doesn't love me. So if they're unconscious, they'll go ahead with that. But if they're approaching from like, okay, where is it coming from, is it really that? So becoming conscious of it. So these are the two pillars that kind of go side by side. If you approach it consciously, you will be uncovering all of the things that you were taught as a kid. So that would be the kind of unlearning every process. Trauma will happen, and trauma does happen to all of us. So even when let us say if the even when the kid grows up, and let us say if the kid has to learn cycling or something like that, even in such scenarios which are like basic things that skills that parents teach and everything, even after the best intentions of the parent, the kid can feel abandoned when the parent lets go of them and they fall. Even though parents' intention is, and as a result, they also over time learn it. But when they let go, how do they feel about it? So there are so many instances as kids, and when if let's say if the mother is doing a job and the kid has to be separated from her from long duration of hours and everything, the kid might develop certain trauma from that. And specifically up to the age of 6 years, you're kind of developing your subconscious is basically takes up all most of the beliefs by the age of 6, right? So in that scenario, you would actually pick on things. You will, because you don't have any emotional regulation tools at that young of an age, you will pick anything that comes your way, and you will take it as whatever way you perceive love. So yeah, so you carry those forward, and as a result, they show up in your relationships until you become conscious and choose to change them, which as a result makes you feel more free and less and more towards unconditional love. So it's like the path towards unconditional love would be, first of all, seeing all the conditions I put on others or myself to be loved.